Well, hello everyone, and welcome to Into the Terminal. Today, we're going to be taking a look at configuring the Postfix mail server. Nate,
Yay!
into the terminal?
Yeah, so let's definitely get that terminal share up. I'm gonna share my past traumas with you all. I have a very long history of running email servers. That was one of the core things I did through most of my career as a systems administrator. You might say it was a job skill because I was the only one willing to actually deal with this stuff. But today we're going to show you some simple postfix stuff that you might run on RHEL. We'll talk about why you might care about this after we get through the critical path here. So first, we're just going to install Postfix, and I'm going to install a quick little command line mail client that we can use to just show you, the delivery worked and whatnot. So I'm going to throw this in here. So we're going to install Postfix, and the command line utility that provides the mail utility is now on RHEL called s-nail with an N. I don't know why it's called that. Don't ask.
Because it's the evolution of mail. The
I
next one in the
guess.
series is nail.
Yeah, right. All right, so now that it's installed, of course, we have to enable the service. So we're going to do that and start it immediately. That's what that dash dash now is doing for us. And then we're going to actually just try to deliver an email. I've done no other configuration to this thing. Out of the box, Postfix will handle local email with no trouble. And if you're lucky, it'll handle remote delivery as well without having to set up much of anything, right? Although that's not necessarily a recommended configuration. We'll talk about that later too. So we're just going to use good old like command line redirection here to echo just the word test. Now this would be like the body of the message. So obviously you can make that longer than just the word test. Through the mail command line client, we're going to give it a subject with -s, test local delivery, and we're just going to send it to root. Okay. Now, doesn't give us much in response, but what we're going to do is we're going to look at the var log mail log. As you might guess, this is the system mail log. Anytime anything goes through Postfix, it'll end up in the mail log. Okay. As you might expect, there's not much going on in here. There's just a little bit about kind of the startup of Postfix. And then if you look at the timestamps here, you're going to see, and this is basically how you group these things. You just got to see how the timestamps are all within the same second here. Usually an email delivery will happen within a second or two. So if you're looking through these logs to figure out what's going on with something, then that's basically how you gotta block these up. Now these message IDs here that you see are also a good way to get them. So if you're like parsing through logs and you can find the message ID for the message you care about, you can grep for it. But again, that's like more advanced log analysis stuff. All right, so you can see here, Postfix's pickup process got a message from root, and it basically took it and put it into the queue here. That's what this queue MGR process is. You can see it says from root at mta0.local. That's what I called my system. It tells me how big the message was, how many recipients there were on it. Of course, in this case, there was only one. And then the log says, hey, I know all about this local user called root. Says originally to root relay equals local. That means that it's a local account. And right here, it says delivered to mailbox. And then right here, look, removed from the queue. So if I now just run mail, not main, but mail, again, this is like command line stuff, really simple, real basic. You're not going to get anything fancy formatting and whatnot out of this, but it gives you, look, there's email for roots that says testing local delivery. If I hit number 1, that'll show me the message. And there it is, test from root at mta0.local. Right now, if we just want to delete that from the queue here because we don't care about it anymore, and then quit, clear the screen again. Now you might say, okay, well, that's not that great of an example. I also have another local user called Gangriff. That's me, right? It's my local, one of my local systems here. That's my local user. I send it to that, you can see again, right? Root doesn't get any mail because it wasn't sent to root. But now if we look at that mail log again, we'll see a similar deal here where it was delivered to Gangriff at mta0.local. All right, so there you go. I mean, simple local mail delivery. I could hop over to Gangriff and show you the message if you really wanted to see it, but I'm going to hope that you trust me. It's there.
So a couple of things, Nate. One, you mentioned that when you're looking at logs, oftentimes the mail deliveries are very fast, especially for local
Yeah.
users.
Yep.
But I like how you highlighted the message ID because if
Hmm.
you're having problems, that message ID is going to be really important to be able to go through the logs to find one that was not delivered successfully. Because a lot of times
Yes.
mail agents will like try to resend for a period of time before they give up. And so it's not going to have all the messages together in the log because it's sitting there trying to resend periodically. And so you'll get
Yep.
some errors much later in the day or maybe even the next day about the
Yep.
mail being deferred.
Yep. And in some of the
Um,
examples we have after the break here, I'll show you what some of those look like in the log too, where email delivery failed, right?
Yeah. And then Nate, have you ever worked with a command line mail client called Mutt?
Mutt. I haven't used Mutt. I used to use Pine, which was then replaced with what? Is that the one that was replaced with Elm, or was it the other way around?
I think it was the other way around.
Okay,
Well,
Pine was
so
another command line based email utility, but it was a full screen app instead of just a command line like that.
yeah, so Mutt is if you wanted to do like actual email via the command line, that would be my
Right,
recommendation instead of mail. Because it just like the mail command, it lets you do things like set subject lines and do stuff via automated scripting, but it also
right.
allows you to do things like attach attachments and
What?
do IMAP connections. Right. So if you're looking for a command line mail client, Mutt's where it's at.
It's
All
funny that you
right.
bring up
So,
attachments because they were the number of times I had to explain to people that email, like in its original occurrence, was really never designed to encapsulate attachments. We just like tacked all that together with MIME encoding and whatever. Yeah, crazy stuff can happen sometimes with some crazy attachments.
yeah. All right. Don't forget to like and subscribe, my viewer
Yeah, yeah.
friends. Uh, Stay with us after the transition as we go a little bit more deep into mail. We're going to start by talking about some of the how do we use mail? What are some common configurations to see? And then, Nate, what additional examples are you going to take us through today?
So I actually have a second mail server set up in my lab here. We're going to email from one to the other. That'll be fun. And I also have a smart relaying setup that we're going to talk about because that's really, in my opinion, a much more common use case for Postfix on a server anyway.
Excellent. So stay with us as we continue our email postfix configuration after the transition.
Yep. Welcome back.
Welcome back. So, Nate, this is our first episode in kind of our services ways to get started with Linux.
Yep.
And why did we choose mail server?
So email delivery on a local system is something that used to be on by default and it was sort of taken for granted. But it's gotten so complicated over the years that now it's off by default. If you do a bare minimum server install on RHEL, it doesn't even include postfix. So local messages delivery, I don't think there's really any mechanism that makes that happen. So you need to add postfix to make that work. So for something as simple as a cron job failed and I want a message to be sent to the administrator about that, like that doesn't work unless you set up postfix. And if you want that to be delivered to a mailbox that you might check on your phone or something, that's even more complicated because spammers ruin everything. That's going to be the theme of today's today's episode. But email used to be really open. It was a really simple protocol. You go server to server really easily. But spammers figured out that they could abuse that protocol and send a whole bunch of crap to everybody, and they could do it almost anonymously, right? So now there's all kinds of blacklists to think about and IP spaces that aren't allowed to send email. And if you get on a blacklist, it's hard to get back off again. So even if you're running a legitimate mail service and somebody like compromises an account and you get blacklisted, it's a real headache. Like I said, I've got scars.
Yeah, and actually, as we were setting up for this episode, we were talking about that because like somebody recently talked to me about running our own mail infrastructure. We use a service to do mail today. And it's like, I think
Mhm.
you underestimate the difficulty of running a mail server on your own.
Absolutely. I mean, I was a huge proponent for running our own mail system in my previous role, and it got to be such a burden because even if you do everything right, it's so easy for you to get blacklisted, and then it's just half your day is blown trying to get yourself off blacklists and whatever. And that's probably the easiest thing you have to deal with in a day.
Right.
It's
Right.
there's a reason everybody's moved to the Microsofts and the Googles, the Gmails and whatever of the world, because running it yourself is just such a pain anymore.
But that said, like there are legitimate reasons to run mail server on a Linux box.
Yes.
And one of the examples that we had discussed was like um, you want to run a website and there's user credential stuff on the website. Well, how do you handle things like resetting someone's password on that website?
Right. Right. That is a legitimate so it's not just notification purposes, but you run a simple website that has user registrations and people want to register for an account and you have to validate them somehow. Usually that's through an email. They send an email back to the email address that they registered with. That won't work unless you have a local mail agent set up to deliver that message somehow, right? And like I said, that's not as easy as it used to be.
Well, and not even just that. Like, let's say your website takes orders. Well, how do you send
Yeah.
people receipts? How do you send them
Yep.
tracking information from the shipment that you sent them?
Yep.
Um, so email
Now,
is still really critical.
some web apps you can just plug in an email service and it'll handle it that way, but others still very much depend on local email delivery. They send it to your local Postfix or whatever daemon is running on your server, and they expect it to handle delivery to the outside world.
Yeah. And there's a lot of configurations where it's like the local web server ingests the information and then sends it to its local postfix, who then emails it to another service, which is how it gets redirected to the end user. And you can kind of not have to
Right.
deal with some of the
Yeah, we'll
complexities of mail.
we'll talk
But
about that in a little bit. I had a quick demo of just how email delivery kind of was designed to work. And this will just take a minute. If we want to bring my terminal back up, we can do that quick. But like I
oh,
said, I have a second box set up. Sorry, go ahead.
are we going to telnet?
We're not going to telnet. I actually
Oh
avoided
man,
using telnet because I didn't want the hate. All right, this might be a little bit smaller. I'm sorry. We had some terminal issues earlier when we were starting the show. Let me see if I can make the window smaller to make the font bigger. How's that look? A little better?
I think that looks good.
Okay, so I've got two systems here, MTA0 and MTA1. Scott, do you know why I call them MTA? You know what that stands for?
Uh, Mail transfer agent.
Mail transfer agent. And that's commonly like an SMTP server would be called a mail transfer agent, right? MTA. Do you know what MUA stands for?
Mail user agent.
There you go. That's like your email client. This is all coming back to me, Scott. I'm telling you. I'm going to leave Red Hat and go be an email administrator again.
Yeah,
No, no,
Nate,
I'm
you
not.
forget that I was like one of the top rated Red Hat instructors for like a decade and did like all the RHCE training. So I know about MTAs and MUAs. Don't you worry.
All right. So the first thing we need to do here is we have to disable a feature. I should say change a feature of Postfix. And the main.cf here is where you do all your configuration for Postfix. We're not changing relay host yet. That's later in the demo in case you wonder why I have that in my search history. But we're just going to go to the end and we're going to add a command that tells it not to do DNS lookups. And I'll tell you why in a second. That's because mail depends very heavily on DNS. And when you're doing something in a lab like this and you don't have full-on DNS set up, Postfix is just going to fail out of the box because it tries to do a DNS lookup for the thing you're trying to do, and it can't because, well, there's no DNS to look up. So I have host entries here to point to MTA1 because that's where we're going to try to deliver mail to. Normally, you would not turn off that DNS lookups piece. I only did that for the sake of the lab. Okay, so now we're just going to try to send. Oh, I have to reload Postfix. Hold on. Okay, and assuming I didn't typo that command because I was busy typing and talking at the same time, this should work now. We're going to use the same old mail command. But this time we're going to do testing internal, right? Then we're going to pipe that through mail again, give it a subject, testing to MTA1, and then we're going to give it, that's
You're
got,
so with your subjects. I would just say test 2.
yeah, well, I'm trying to differentiate these so that if I did have crap still sitting in the other mailbox, it's going to be easy to spot. All right, now we're going to go root at mta1.local, which is the DNS entry or the hosts entry that I had set up for this. Now, this is the birth of how SMTP was working. Now, Scott, there may be history that I'm not aware of, but my understanding is SMTP came from like the old Unix to Unix copy protocol as a more global way to deliver messages between systems like this, right? And then we all just expanded on that to make email services and whatnot. This was almost like the first decentralized messaging. Think about it, right? Okay. So you can see there, it accepted it. If I now look at my mail log again, you should see here. Let's see if I can highlight just that message. You see, again, gave it the message ID, yada, yada, yada. Where's the thing I'm looking for here? You can see relaying to mta1.local because it realized this is not a local mailbox. It's going to send it to 10.0.0.177 because that's what it got from my host entry. And it even gives you some statistical information about how long it took to process the message. Status equals sent. Now, if I go over here, back to root here, I don't know why I wasn't root to begin with. Poor preparation here. Now I got to typo my password a few times first. Now, this one has been set up for a while, so you're going to see a bunch of other stuff in the mail log because I've been testing this a few times before we got here. Imagine that, Scott. I tested before the show started.
That's crazy town.
Crazy town. All right. So I'm just trying to find the whole transaction here. All right. So here it says it gave me a warning because it doesn't know what MTA0 is because there's no reverse entry for it. That's one of those things that can cause mail delivery to be problematic. My dogs are about to bark. I'm very sorry if they start going crazy. Let's see here. It tells me the client. It says it gives it the message ID. And I believe these message IDs should match from postfix server to postfix server, right? Here it says that it basically accepted the message and then the remote system disconnected and delivered to mailbox. So now if I run mail here as root on MTA1, which if you recall, that's the address we sent it to, there you go, testing to MTA1. Ta-da! So this is kind of how things were started, right? Like this is how you would send messages amongst different Unix or Linux systems. So any questions on that one before we move ahead?
So I know that in the log there, you can see the message ID. It is included in the header when the message is sent to the recipient machine. But once it goes on the recipient machine,
it is a different ID. I'm looking at it now.
Yeah, and that's because like if you're a high volume mail server and all these other mail servers are bombarding you with messages, how do you make sure there's no conflict in your message ID, right?
Right. You have to own the message ID then. Yep. And you talk about headers. That's interesting. We don't have a good example of that here because this isn't relaying through several systems, but the headers, every mail system that this message touches will get a new header added to the message. So if you're an email administrator and you're like, you have to figure out where a message came from or why a message delivery failed, you look at those headers and the headers will tell you, I accepted this, I delivered it. I accepted this, I delivered this. I accepted it, I rejected it, right? And then that's how you know kind of the chain that this particular message went through to get to its recipient. Really helpful sometimes.
Where I use that a lot is when tracebacking scam emails, like phishing emails, or like one where we're not sure exactly where it came from, or it appears to have been masqueraded as one user or another. We can look back at the headers to figure out what servers it has bounced off of to decide whether it's real or not real.
There's also, if you're trying to figure out why an email was delayed, you can see which system, based on the timestamps, which system held on to the message for a long time. And then you can try to figure out why based on that information.
Oh no! Oh, thank goodness you didn't leave the room, Nate. Otherwise, my
Yeah,
internet
no,
would fail.
trying to get the dog to leave before she gets into a barking fit because the other dogs are barking. But she won't. She just sits there. Yeah, I see you. Anyway, she wants to be part of the live stream today, I guess. All right, so I do have some more demos here. I can move right into the next one if there's no questions or anything. I don't even have chat open. Sorry, folks, if anybody's streaming messages into the chat.
So before we started, somebody else suggested Telnet. It wasn't even me.
Yeah.
And so that was fun.
So, I mean, that's the fun thing with especially older protocols like SMTP. You can literally telnet to your postfix port, which should be port 25 unless you've moved it. And you can issue plain text commands to craft and deliver an email to an address as long as you know the syntax.
So I would like to point out that the out of the box configuration for every mail server that has come from Red Hat for the last, I don't know, 10 years, maybe even longer, is that it will not accept
True.
unknown. So yes, you can, but because you're not coming from a trusted, verifiable source, it won't actually accept the mail that you've typed into it and try to deliver it.
Hold on. Trying to show this here, right?
Vincent in chat points out that telnetting with TCP dump is an excellent combination to do troubleshooting, to kind of figure out what's happening between two mail servers.
Trying to find it here. Okay. So here you can see on the right-hand terminal versus the left-hand terminal. The left-hand terminal, this is the one I just installed at the beginning of the show. You can see iNet Interfaces says localhost, and this was something I was going to show later in the show anyway, but since it's topical, we'll do it now. So iNet Interfaces says localhost on this one. That means it only listens on 127.0.0.1. So for local mail delivery, it works perfect. As soon as anything remote tries to connect to this machine, it'll be like, I don't even have a service on that port because it's only on local. On this one, I said iNet interfaces equals all. Now, this tells it to listen on all interfaces. You can be a lot more specific than that. For the sake of this demo, this was good enough. But if you have a system that has several interfaces, you might specify specifically this interface is where I want it to listen on, right? So in this case, iNet interfaces equals all means it'll listen on port 25 on any interface on this machine. So I can connect to it on localhost or on the Ethernet port, right? The public IP address. Okay.
Yeah, but I think what we were talking about was the relay settings, and I know that our next demo talks some about that. So
That is next. Yep. Well, you were saying about how it won't listen on anything but localhost, and that's why I wanted to show that quick. Okay, so let me kind of reset for the next demo here.
And Nate, we may need to make
smart relay
size a little bit bigger again.
Is it too small again? Let me see what I can do here. Making the font bigger makes the window bigger, so you didn't see any change in that at all, did you? There, now it should look a little bigger. Okay, so smart relaying. Scott, what's smart relaying? Do you know what smart relaying is, Mr. I know all the instructor stuff?
Smart relaying is that you make decisions before you decide to accept an email and send it out to another mail server.
Right. So we talked earlier about relaying and how things are blacklisted and whatnot. So I just have a quick demo here to show you what that's going to look like. Let's just try to use mail again. We're just going to send it to no reply at redhat.com, which obviously is not a place that should accept mail, but it'll, for the sake of our test, this will work just fine. Because what's going to happen is we're going to tell Postfix, hey, I want to send an email to something that's not a local mailbox. And then Postfix should not be able to deliver that. So what we're going to do now is look at that mail log again. And we should have find that message here. Here's 52, 1752. Nope, not 52, 1758. So we should have, should tell us there's a bounce message, or did it tell me it worked? It can't have worked. It's not supposed to work.
Oh, so much for the testing.
Yeah, right? No, I don't see the message at all here. Maybe it just rejected it outright. No, what went wrong here? Oh, is it because I still have that?
And Vincent suggests running postqueue-p to see if it's queued.
Not Nginx. What am I thinking here? With Q dash, what was it?
P as in Papa.
P as in Papa. There it is. Oh yeah, okay. Connection timed out to try to get there. All right. So this is similar. What I was trying to get it to do, and this is what it did in my test yesterday, is it actually rejected it because the IP address that it would have relayed through externally is just my home cable modem. And those are blacklisted. They're blacklisted on purpose because residential cable modems should not be sending email like this. And what should then happen is you get a non-delivery back to the place that you sent it from. And the reason I wanted to show that as an example is because if you're either running in your home lab, or even if you're running on like a cloud provider or even an ISP, like wherever you're hosting your site, you'll have similar mail delivery problems simply because, especially cloud providers, they're all blacklisted because they're not supposed to be sending mail, right? Because it's too common for spammers to spin up a cloud box, use it to relay a bunch of junk mail for 6 hours, and then just turn it off, right? Because that way they're that much less traceable. So the way to get around that is to have your local postfix system deliver mail through a trusted system. And that's what we call smart relaying or relaying, right? Relaying is kind of a general term for my mail server is delivering through another one. It also, you saw it use the word relay when we just delivered that message to MTA1's root account, right? Because it relayed it to a second box. Smart relaying is, if it meets certain criteria, it will send it to the external system. Otherwise, it will handle it locally, right? That's why it's called smart relaying instead of just like 100% relay everything. So the best way I can demo that without getting really complicated is to relay messages through my other mail server, right? So we're going to do, hang on here. Clear the screen first here. And now is where we want that relay host. All right, so you can see there's a bunch of examples here for how to set up a relay host. I'm going to use it. I'm going to do it by IP address because, again, I don't have DNS resolution set up here. Normally, you'd use a host name of whatever the sending mail server you want to go through. And there's a lot more complicated ways to set this up. Normally, an email relay will require authentication, and there's ways to configure that. But I didn't want to get that complicated for this example, which is why I did this with the local system here.
Yeah, and so a relay host is typically used, or a place where we would really see it used is like what we were talking about earlier. You have an application that needs to send email to somebody, but that application is running on a machine that doesn't natively send email, right? Because of all the complexities of managing a mail server. So you have your application server use a local postfix instance to then relay the mail to your actual mail infrastructure that handles all the blacklisting and other stuff. And so that's what we're talking about here is we're going to take this mail, we're going to send it to that intermediary mail server who will then send it out for delivery.
The first test I'm going to do here is we're going to send it to mta1.local again. which you might think is just the exact same example we used before, but this time Postfix is configured to use that relay host instead, right? Now, I could have gotten more complicated, had a third system to try to show this better, but let's be honest here. I only want so many mail servers in my home lab. So look at mail log again. We're going to see that the message should have been handed off right here. See, it says relay 10.0.0.177. And what this will do is anything that we send to any address that isn't local will also get relayed through there. So if I try that no reply for that.com again, it should do this very similar thing in the mail log. There, again, it relayed it to 10.0.0.177. So anything that goes through Postfix that isn't recognized as a local account will relay back out through MTA1. So if I go to log over here, we should see the messages in the log here because they were relayed. Here's the thing I was looking for. Oh, let's make this bigger so you can see it better. Here, you see this message here where it says no reply at redhat.com, relay equals mimecast.com. That must be who we use for our internal email filtering. Status equals bounced, right? And it tells me why it's bounced. It's listed on the public blacklist. So check spamhouse.org. Spamhouse is one of these remote blacklists that people can subscribe to that will help email administrators block messages from IP addresses that are sketchy, right? So a home cable modem is considered a sketchy address when it comes to email delivery. So now if I were to check back over here, I think I should have, I may not have it yet. I'll get a bounce message eventually. In fact, if we checked that post queue over here again.
And we may need to clear it so we can see it above our heads.
No, it's not in the queue here. I must have already rejected it. So eventually there will be a bounce message generated, and I think it'll come back to where I sent it from. Although, because email delivery here is like barely working because of my basically like very basic demo setup here, I may never see the bounce because it may not be able to deliver it. But in a normal email setup, you'd get a bounce message, and it would tell you why, and it would say it was blocked by Spamhouse. And now the dog wants to get out. Oh, dog. It's a fun day today. All right, so that's basically how relaying works. Now, personally, for my web setups and whatnot, I relay through Amazon's simple email service, which requires that you set up authentication and you have to make a key and all that stuff within Amazon. And it's a much more complicated setup, but you have to basically define all that within your Postfix config. And I didn't want to go through all that for today's demo.
Yeah, and
that's
Gmail,
how you might do it.
Google domains have a similar setup where you can send them email from services, and they have to use multiple factor authentication and other stuff to work through their API.
Yep. The only other thing I wanted to talk about was open relaying. It's an important thing to think about when you're setting up a Postfix system, especially if you're doing a really basic setup like I just demonstrated. Out of the box, your system will be configured that it will not relay anything at all, right? So if I tried to set up that relay host and then I tried to send that message, it would have just flat out rejected me, said, nope, I'm not allowed to relay. And I can show that configuration quick here if we bring up terminal again. That is called My Networks. An underscore. Oh, helps if I spell networks properly. Okay, so My Networks, and there's a couple ways to configure this. There's a couple ways to configure this. There's a My Networks style, which I'm showing on the screen right now. You can tell it to accept based on class, subnet, or host, right? I've never really worked with it that way. I usually go with these IP block setups because I'm really familiar with how to do CIDR notation, right? So in my case, my networks is 10.0.0.0/24, which means anything in the 10.0.0.0 network is allowed to relay through my system. Normally, this is basically set to don't relay anything, right? And I could probably should. No, I think it's just commented out, which basically says don't relay stuff. So that's the thing you're going to want to be aware of. If you set this to relay everything, then you've made what's called an open relay. Open relays are bad. I don't want to go too deep in the effort of time here, but open relays basically means anything that if you connect to this server, it'll relay anywhere in the world. Now, obviously, there'll be blacklists and stuff to contend with. But if you're running an actual legit email service and you have an open relay, very bad stuff. You'll get blacklisted very quickly. So you need to pay attention to that if you're trying to set up a postfix box that does more than just local mail delivery. And that's all the demos I had for today. So only a few minutes over.
Oh, don't worry.
That was a lot of information.
Producer Eric has told us about being over.
Oh, yeah. I see that there now. Sorry.
So next week, we're actually going to take a week off because there's a Red Hat company holiday. But the week after that, and we'll be talking about everyone's favorite service, NFS, the network file service.
Yay. NFS, another service that has given me scars over the years. But yeah, I hope everybody has come away learning a little bit about Postfix and how to set it up. And it's not so I don't know, was Postfix scary before? If it was, I hope it's not anymore.
I mean, Postfix was the nicer, gentler alternative to SendMail.
So SendMail.
Yeah.
Yeah, SendMail was like you actually had to build the config in a special like macro definition, and then it would compile it into it was
SendMail PDF format. Yeah, no, I am horribly familiar.
I used to run Qmail. That's how far back my email administration goes. Qmail was kind of like the de facto standard for ISP style email for a long time. And then Zimbra, which was another good one, which had a lot of postfix in it. Zimbra leveraged postfix very heavily, which is why I'm familiar with all the postfix stuff.
So
anyway,
in 2 weeks, we will be doing NFS. Also, don't forget about RHEL Presents. Producer Eric will be hosting that show since that's his show. And he's going to be doing a day in the life of a solutions architect, which is the pre-sales technical person at Red Hat. So usually when you talk to somebody at Red Hat and they're technical, if you're a customer, this is probably one of the types of people you talk to.
Right.
So he'll be having, I'm guessing he's going to be having a solutions architect on the show. And we'll continue our additional services after NFS. I don't know that we've really structured which ones are coming next, but we'll keep going.
We've batted around a number of them, so something good. We'll figure it out before the NFS episode airs.
Yeah, and hopefully I'll actually test the NFS setup before we show up and do it live in front of people. What could possibly go wrong?
Yeah, right. I mean, NFS is so simple, right? It's so easy. It's like setting up sudo, easy.
Oh, I see Shantanu is advocating for NFS v4. I mean, of course, with the Kerberos, clearly that's what we do on a 30-minute show.
Are you going to do auto mount and like remote home directories and everything, Scott?
I mean, AutoFS is sure, but probably not for AutoFS is probably its own show, or at least part of its own show. All right. Producer Eric, we understand we're over a lot. So don't forget to mash that like and subscribe. And we'll keep making into the terminal content. Nate, any parts of wisdom?
So many scars.
Running a mail
folks. Yes, running a mail server is hard.
All right, everyone. Until next time, see you in the terminal.